Mid-spring 2017, the second semester of my senior year of arts high school. I can't recall the date or even the month, a blockage of memory that's no doubt a strong indication of a then flailing and downbeat mental framework. I was blurred, lonely, and on the precipice of a future that should have been marked by excitement, but which instead loomed as uncertain and daunting, like the prospect of disappearing slowly and silently into a big crowd. This particular spring evening, I'd ended up at a house party. The house was in the relatively affluent Verdugo foothills of Glendale, California, and belonged to the parents of a film studies major in my year named Violet Smith, a name that rings out as a near-perfect indictment of some core Gen Z sentiment. It's reminiscent of an expression I recall being told in preschool, which my Gen X parents found humorous upon my recounting that evening. "You're all special," the teacher had told us kids, who were grouped sitting cross-legged on the multicolored carpet, just like everyone else. And perhaps it reflects something uglier about my cohort of fellow upper-middle-class East Side Angelinos that had gathered at Violet's house that cloudy, chilly evening. We were the artsy kids of successful sculptors and videographers and character actors. We were different from our West Side Beverly Hills equivalents. Those were the straight and narrow kids of successful executives and A-list movie stars, and the doctors and lawyers and accountants for those stars. But us teenage artists, I had the sneaking suspicion that we were just like our artist parents, a little bit unique and a little bit all the same, wanting more than anything to be special, just like everyone else. And with that suspicion came the demoralizing and burdensome realization that we had been made a false promise, sold a bill of goods at an early age. We had been told we were all Violets, when in reality, we were all Smiths. In any case, I presume that Violet's parents were out of town or otherwise engaged for the evening, the main ingredient for the night's recipe. That same smattering of listless and angsty teenage art students would brood, drink Tito's on Violet's swing set, and perhaps dance to Drake. I don't remember the dancing, but years later I do remember some of the words. "I've been down so long, it looked like up to me," he said. "I got fake people showing fake love to me, straight up to my face." Around this time, Los Angeles had been receiving its first serious rainfall of the calendar year, some heavy and fairly regular showers. For me, the weather portended a certain amount of instability about the future of my quote-unquote relationship with Jordan, a modern dancer in the year below me at Arts High, with whom I'd recently begun a primarily SMS-based flirtation. We had been introduced by our mutual friend Brendan, himself also a dancer, who was that off-dangerous blend of being demanding and having way too much time on his hands. I worried Brendan and I hung out mostly because neither of us had anything better to do. He'd regularly lash out at me for being a bad friend, and I'd offer a mumbly, half-assed apology. Then Friday would roll around, and I'd get the same text every time. "Sup, bro? What's the game plan for tonight?" For the few weeks after Brendan made our acquaintance, things with Jordan were all well and fine and dandy. We shared the best banana splits that North Glendale's IHOP had to offer, sat in a box at the Clipper game with comp tickets from her dad's work, and frequently drove straight from school to various lookout points in Elysian Park, allowing mischief to ensue in the back seat after I'd hung the crumply tinfoil-like sunshades over the rear windows. During school hours, we make a game of pretending we didn't know each other, avoiding eye contact in the hallways or with our respective friend groups at lunchtime. The charade made it all the more exciting when she hopped in my car in the back nook of the parking lot after the last bell and we sped away. So secretive, for no good reason, so directionless, a spring fling that felt like an affair, decidedly unserious and yet magically adult. But now, both proverbial and literal rain clouds were hovering over our prospects. I was graduating in mere months and spending the entire summer as a counselor at a Jewish sleepaway camp an hour north. She had an on and off again boyfriend who was never quite out of the picture, and she also had her own summer plans, a multi-week modern dance boot camp in New Mexico. For the record, the fact that she had a boyfriend was never a bother. I relished my identity as the interloper, the low-stakes, low-commitment alternative in the middle of some other people's mess. The shoulder for her to cry on when the other shoulder let her down. She was in love with someone else, and I was more than content to pretend that I didn't need love anyway. And my car. My ride to the party that night was my 1998 forest green BMW 5 Series. I'd named him Clive, after a limited edition of promotional films made by international directors and licensed by the BMW Corporation in the early 2000s, all of which starred the lengthy, severe, and vaguely charming Clive Owen, one of my major acting inspirations at the time. Something always seemed to be happening to Clive Owen in those short films. Clive Owen, who was never disappearing into a crowd. He was a 16th birthday present from my uncle, who had bought Clive new in 1998, coincidentally also the year of my birth, and logged minimal mileage on the car. Though Clive had lived another life before meeting me, it felt clear from the jump that we had so much more in common than Clive had with his previous owner. For one, we were babies of the late 90s raised in America, pampered, high-strung, finicky. But Clive had qualities and essences that I wanted and lacked. He was at peace with himself. He was impressive, unconcerned about how other people saw him. He was capable and strong, the ultimate driving machine. When I was operating him, we moved through the world as one. We had an unspoken, deep connection, and I had a gut feeling we were twin souls. There was real love between us. That night, with about 36 of our classmates in attendance, Jordan and I kissed in the rain under tree cover after we walked up the hilly cul-de-sac from Violet's house. The end of the street was a trailhead of a hiking path, and Jordan perched herself atop the horizontal wooden beams that fenced the entrance. She wrapped her legs around my midsection to steady herself. When she got closer, to trace over my face with her cross necklace, I noticed that her breath smelled like Fireball cinnamon whiskey. "Why do we never hang out when we're both sober?" she asked. I wasn't drunk. I had to drive Clive home later. And it also wasn't true. I'd never seen her drink before, but I kept my mouth shut. I never had good answers to the questions she asked me. Later in that night, we kissed for a while longer on the bed in Violet's younger sister's bedroom. "Let me whisper something in your ear," Jordan mouthed quietly. As I turned my head sidelong to receive her message, I noticed that the wall of Violet's younger sister's bedroom was lined with boxes upon boxes of an assortment of Girl Scout cookies, packaged and ready to be sold. I missed out on hearing whatever Jordan whispered. Eventually, we were interrupted by Brendan's knocking on the door with some indecipherable urgency. "Dude, I'm leaving. If you want to sleep over, you have to follow me out now." "Why now?" I asked him. "Aren't we driving separate cars?" The logistics of the evening are like LA itself, smoggy, poorly laid out, and tricky to navigate. Regardless, Brendan and I said our goodbyes and got into our respective vehicles. We peeled down the hilly suburban street and headed towards Freeway. It was 3:30 in the morning. The air was crisp, the road was slick and tarry, the smell of fresh rain. I don't remember what song was playing. All I remember was the suddenness. 1 second, I'm drifting numbly along the right sloping freeway on-ramp, with Brendan about a football field ahead of me in his condensed milk-colored Mini Cooper. The next second, the steering wheel is completely unresponsive to my grip as trusty old Clive hits a skid and starts to hydroplane, and suddenly he's spinning sideways end around end at a speed my pre-developed prefrontal cortex is struggling to comprehend. There was no telling how fast time was moving, only that my thoughts felt dilated and panicked and rabbit-like, that it felt as though the wheel was steering me rather than the other way around, and that blinking lights began flickering on my dashboard like a fireworks show in miniature. What's more, I felt the sensation that Clive himself was beginning to embody a quarter that had been flipped in the air as though by a referee to determine possession at the beginning of a soccer game. I felt myself, inside the green glowing car, to be literally inside of a cosmic coin flip, with Clive's hydroplaning rotation, about 6 full cycles in at this point, operating on vertical and horizontal spatial planes. There is a distinct and sublime liberation in a momentary total lapse of control. It's the thrill of yelling, stop the ride," as you reach the top of a roller coaster, knowing full well you're out of earshot of the ride operator, who wouldn't pull the lever even if they could. I braced myself, without knowing for what exactly. Impact, doom, death perhaps. Various concerns glanced briefly across a Rolodex of whirling thoughts. I gradually became conscious that the hieroglyphics were now rearranging themselves more deliberately on the dash, to the point where the message was somehow decipherable. And I shit you not. "Eli, this is God. This time, it's a yes. Next time, who knows?" And then, as though moved by the force of an invisible hand, Clive ceased careening and came to rest in exactly the same position he had been in before the skid, facing forward squarely between the white lines on the pavement of the on-ramp. Music continued to crackle at a low volume on my cassette tape deck. My body buzzed and shivered uncontrollably. The lights on the dash twinkled back to normal like fading embers as I gingerly maneuvered Clive into the freeway's shoulder and gear shifted him into park. I was alone, save for Brendan's Mini Coupe, on a major freeway in Los Angeles, and I was alive. The incredible unlikelihood of those two facts came into a slow, hazy focus. I cut the engine and exited the vehicle. Some distance ahead, Brendan veered to the side of the on-ramp and registered shock. He got out and walked purposefully along the shoulder to where I was stalled. He did perhaps the best thing he possibly could have done for me at the time. He gave me a long, sturdy, and silent hug. Breathing deeply, I noticed for the first time that we used different scents of the same brand of deodorant. The placid state highway suddenly smelled like our PE locker room, with faint hints of coconut and lavender. After we pulled apart, Brendan wordlessly lit my camel blue Turkish Royal cigarette because my hands were too unsteady to do it for myself. It was the last dart in the navy blue lined carton I had procured from the glove compartment. My lucky. And then, in our separate cars, we hit the road again. Brendan let me crash on his futon when we were back at his dad's house. 40 minutes of quiet, drizzly San Fernando Valley driving later. No matter how far you drive, you can never truly leave LA. And above all, that mid-spring night, Clive was okay. There wasn't a scratch on his emerald detail, no structural damage to his sleek interior, no evidence at all. That night, for Clive, it was as though nothing had happened. And for many, many years, I pretended as though nothing ever did.
Woo. Oh, that was cool. Eli is a multidisciplinary writer who lives his life and works his works in Los Angeles, California.